This happened when I was 12 years old, and it was not long ago. At all, my name is Alex. The story took place in Connecticut when I went to visit my aunt, my uncle, and my two cousins. Their names were Ryan, who is 18, and Brandon, who is 16. I do not want to waste any more time, so I will get straight into the experience. I arrived on a Friday. Afternoon snow was falling hard, the kind that sticks to every branch and makes the sky look white. My aunt's house sat at the edge of a huge forest. The trees were tall, and even in daylight, the woods looked dark. My mom and my aunt had already warned me, do not go into that forest. It is massive, and you will get lost. I nodded, but I was a cheeky kid and did not always listen the first day. I just chilled. I unpacked, played video games with Ryan and Brandon, and watched the snow pile up outside. By the next morning, the yard was covered in deep powder around noon. I went outside to throw snowballs at a fence post. Ryan and Brandon joined me, and after a few minutes, they said, "Yo, Alex, do you want to go in the forest with us?" I hesitated. I heard my mom's voice in my head. Still, I felt the pull of adventure. The forest looked like a giant mystery covered in white, so I said yes. We put on our thick coats and boots and pushed through the snow. The woods were quiet, except for the crunch under our feet. Some places were knee-deep, other spots were more like waist-deep. We walked for maybe 10 minutes, laughing and talking, pretending we were on some quest. Then we heard a scream. It sounded like a young girl, sharp and high. We stopped. The air seemed to freeze around us. I looked at Ryan, then Brandon. Neither cousin spoke, they just frowned. After a few seconds, Ryan shrugged and said, "Probably nothing." So we kept moving. Not long after, the exact same scream ripped through the trees. Again, same pitch, same length, like someone pressed replay. Now even. Brandon looked nervous. He tried to act calm and said, "There's nothing to worry about." But he had not finished the sentence when the scream came a third time. Fear hit me hard. My heart banged in my chest. Even though our legs were buried in snow, we turned and ran. Branches whipped our jackets. Cold air burned my throat, but I did not stop. At last we burst out of the tree line and reached the yard behind my aunt's house. We were breathing so loudly, we almost missed another sound banging. It came from the old wooden shed near the back fence. Ryan, the oldest, moved closer and peeked inside. Nobody was there, but the latch was broken, and the door hung open inside. Several tools were missing. Ryan closed the door quickly. None of us said what we were thinking, but we all felt it. We should have told our parents right away, but we were scared of getting grounded for entering the forest, so we stayed quiet that night. I lay in the guest room staring at the ceiling. Around midnight, I heard a light tapping on the window. My room was on the second floor, and the only thing outside was a slanted rooftop covered in snow. I did not move. I barely breathed. The tapping went on and on, like someone trying to get my attention without waking anyone else. It stopped only when the sun came up, and by then I had gotten zero sleep. Later that morning, the three of us shoveled the driveway, then grabbed a football and kicked it around the yard. A cold wind blew hard, and the sky stayed gray while we were running routes. The scream came again. It sounded closer than ever. Brandon dashed into the garage and came back with a metal baseball bat. Ryan grabbed a flashlight, even though it was daytime. I picked up a thick stick. We followed the sound across the side yard to a clump of bushes. There, half buried in snow, we found a small battery radio. The volume was turned all the way up, and it was playing a loop of the same girl's scream we had heard in the forest. My first reaction was relief. It was only a prank. I thought somebody had left the radio on to scare kids. Then I noticed footprints, large ones leading from the bushes toward the back of the property. Before we could talk, a man stepped out from behind a pine tree. He wore a dark winter coat and a knitted cap pulled low. His face was pale, and his cheeks were red from the cold. He called out almost friendly, "Guys, come with me. I have something to show you." Ryan shouted, "No." The man's smile stretched wide and unnatural, showing too many teeth for several long seconds. He just stood there smiling. Then he rushed forward through the snow we turned, and sprinted. The man slipped on an icy patch and fell. That gave us a few precious seconds. We reached the back door, yanked it open, and slammed it shut behind us. My aunt and uncle heard the noise and rushed in. We were shaking so hard we could barely speak. Finally, we poured out everything there. Forrest, the screen, the shed, the missing tools, the tapping, the radio. The man, my aunt's face went white. She picked up the phone and called the police officers. Arrived within minutes. They searched the yard, the woods near the house, and the shed about. An hour later, they caught the man walking along a side road. He still had a hammer and a cordless drill tucked inside. His coat. The police talked to my aunt and uncle for a long time. That was when I learned the stranger's name. He was Carl, my aunt's ex-boyfriend from years earlier. He had moved out of state after she married my uncle, but now he had come back. The officers believed he broke into the shed to grab tools. Then he set up the radio in the bushes and used a recording of a child's scream to lure us toward him. He planned to grab us, threaten us, and force my aunt to meet him. He thought she would leave my uncle if it meant saving us. If she refused, he would hurt us. That was his sick plan. Carl went to jail that day. The police said the deep snow had helped slow him down if the ground had been clear. He might have caught one of us before we reached the house. The slipping accident probably saved us too. I still picture his face when he slid eyes, wide arms flailing. That awful grin gone in a blink. That night, my cousins and I slept in the living room with the TV on. Nobody wanted to be alone. I felt safer, but still kept checking the windows. Snow kept falling, burying Carl's footprints in the radio tracks. The next morning, the cops returned to pick up the broken radio and take more photos of the shed. They told us we were lucky kids. I thought about what my mom and my aunt said. Do not go into that forest. They were right. We could have been lost, or worse. I felt guilty for disobeying, but also thankful that the story ended the way it did. Whenever snow starts falling heavily, I remember that weekend. Connecticut, the scream in the woods, the tapping on the glass, and the man who thought he could scare children into breaking a family apart. He failed, and I'm glad he did. Music. It was a little after 1 o'clock in the morning, though it felt much later. The house was dark and quiet, and each of us was in our own room. I was only 8 then, but my sisters trusted me because I was the one who knew the alarm code. Our neighborhood had heard gunshots a few nights before, so Mom had left the security system on the strongest setting when she went out to work. Her night shift at the hospital, I lay in bed with my flashlight, reading the same comic page for the 3rd time, when the sudden scream of the alarm split the silence. The sound was so loud it shook the window glass and rattled in my chest. I tossed the blanket aside and ran into the hall meeting. My sisters at the same moment. Their eyes were huge and shiny in the weak nightlight. Code. Lena shouted, but the noise swallowed her voice. I didn't need the reminder. My hands were trembling, but they moved on their own, guiding me down the hallway. To the keypad beside the front door, I typed Mom's 4 numbers. The siren cut off midway, and the house fell into a stillness that felt even louder for 5 long seconds. None of us spoke. My heart thumped so hard it almost hurt. Kayla finally said, "Did you open anything?" I shook my head. I was in my room. The whole time we checked every door we could see from the hallway. The locks were still in place, and the windows were closed. The only entrance we did not dare look at was the door inside. The garage that led straight to the backyard. Mom called it the weak spot because it faced the alley. We tried to laugh it off. Maybe a loose wire. I told myself maybe a cat brushed a sensor. But while we stood there, we heard a single crack outside. Sharp and quick, like either a distant gunshot or a leftover firework from July 4th. We all froze again. The silence returned, and for a minute, nothing else happened. Then, without warning, the alarm blared a second time. I had never felt fear hit me so hard my legs would not move. Lena grabbed my arm, but this time I could not make myself run back to the keypad. The siren kept screaming, "Lena," and Kayla half pushed, half carried me down the hall. Until the numbers were in reach, I forced my shaking. Fingers to hit the right sequence, and the noise stopped. All the doors still looked shut again. We stared at each other, trying to breathe. None of us wanted to face the garage door. We stood there, in a tight circle for almost a minute, listening. The house settled with small creaks, but the air felt different now, as if someone else might be standing just out of sight. Lena made the next move, master bedroom. She said, "Lock it." We hurried across the hall and slipped into Mom's room. The bedroom door had a stronger lock than the others, and the bathroom inside had a second door if we needed to retreat. Again, Kayla kicked the door shut, turned the bolt, and drew the curtains. Tight Mom's room felt larger than I remembered, but the shadows in the corners felt alive. We armed ourselves with whatever we could grab. Kayla held a heavy table lamp by the base Lena chose. Mom's old softball bat. I picked up a thick perfume bottle made of metal that felt cold and solid in my hand. We sat on the carpet beside the bed, backs to the wall, listening to every sound outside the door. The alarm stayed silent, but each time the wind shook. A branch against the siding, we flinched. Minutes stretched into an hour, and then another. My eyelids drooped, but each time my head slipped forward. A noise jolted me awake. I kept staring at the gap under the door, half expecting to see a shadow slide across the light from the hallway nightlight around. 4 o'clock in the morning, the sky began to gray. Birds started chirping outside, and the normal sounds of early morning made the house feel almost safe again. We still waited another half hour before Lena slowly unlocked the door. The hallway light flickered, but nothing moved. We walked together through each room, every window. Latch sat in place. The front side and back doors were locked. Finally, we reached the garage. Entry. My stomach turned as I twisted the doorknob and eased it open. The garage was dim, the single bulb overhead casting long shapes over boxes and tools. The big lift-up door was shut, its hinge bar still in place. Yet something felt off. The smell in the garage was faintly different, like cold night. Air clinging to the walls. We did not step outside. None of us wanted to know if footprints marked the dirt behind the house. We closed the garage door again and decided that was enough proof we needed. Soon after, Lena called our older brother, who lived across town. I called Mom at the hospital. She sounded calm on the phone, but promised to check the security camera recordings when she got home in the morning. She also reminded us that only she kept the key to the backyard gate. Nobody else should have been able to stand outside that garage door without climbing a fence. Mom arrived a little after sunrise. She walked the yard and found no broken boards, no signs that the gate latch was forced. The camera above the front porch had not caught anything but the sensor log on the alarm. Control panel showed 2 trips within 3 minutes, both labeled garage side door. Someone or something had tried to open that one door twice. We never got an answer. No neighbors reported a prowler or heard a break-in. Maybe the system glitched, the company said, but they could not explain the faint marks on the outer garage knob, like scratches from a tool. Mom had them replaced. The entire lock the same afternoon. Still, the damage inside us was already done. Lena started keeping a pocket knife under her pillow. Kayla slept most nights with headphones, so she would not jump at every creak. I would wake up sweating whenever the wind made the gutters rattle. Even Mom admitted later that she never felt the house was truly safe again. A few years passed, and the landlord told us the roof needed serious work. We packed our things and moved across town. None of us complained after we settled into the new place. Mom said she was relieved to leave our old night behind. Sometimes on weekends, we drive past the old house out of curiosity. The front lawn looks smaller than I remember, and someone new has painted the siding a lighter color. The garage door is still the same. I wonder if the lock I tightened that night is still on the handle, hiding its scars under fresh paint. I turned 13 this year. People think kids forget scary moments as they grow, but that night stays clear in my head. The 2 sharp screams of the alarm, A single crack in the distance, the shiver of the doorknob. When I finally opened the garage, we never learned who or what tried to come inside, and maybe that is the worst part. The unknown can follow you longer than any face you can name before we dive into the next story. If you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming scary stories. I was a new student at a small school in November of 2017. The size was around 50 kids in total. Yeah, I know small, right? The reason I went there was that the things I was learning in that old school were way too advanced for me. I had to transition into a school where the work was way easier and where I could focus better. It's called the Smith School, and it is based in New York City. It used to be a school for kids who had a criminal history. Now it has changed into a school with kids who have special needs. I was only there for almost a full year, and then I transferred to a bigger school. I was pretty much friends with everyone at that school because the school was so small. I even ended up dating a guy. His name was Kyle Fernandez. I believe that I started dating him in February or March of 2018. The reason why he went to the Smith School is that he got kicked out of his previous school due to selling weed to other students at that school, and one person ended up telling on him. The first 2 to 3 months of dating him, he was nice to me and to the people who went to our school, but at the same time, he was also high on drugs for most of the time. I never smoked weed, and I never will. Kyle would also sometimes take me to hang out with his outside school friends. They were also a lot like him, smoking and selling weed and having their pants sag, which would reveal their underwear. It was so burning to see that crap, but Kyle loved me, and I loved him, while Kyle and his friends would do stuff that would get them in trouble. I would stay out of it, and to my miracle, Kyle never pressured me to join along with him. A few more months went on, and our relationship would stay the same until one day in July, when everything changed. On that day, Kyle came over to my place at night for an hour. We were just chatting in my bedroom until my phone kept going off. It was a bunch of text messages from my friend Liam. I opened iMessage, and I saw that he sent me a bunch of edgy but funny memes. I started laughing hard, and Kyle then asked me, "Who's texting you?" I told him that it was my friend Liam. He then asked me if he could see the texts. I then responded saying, "Please, it's really nothing. He's a longtime friend who makes me laugh all the time." Kyle then got really upset with me and demanded to look at my phone. My smile faded away. I now felt a little skittish. I then muttered the word no. Guess what happens next? I think you know what Kyle did after I told him no, was that he grabbed my phone and threw it to the wall. Glass went everywhere, to the floor, the lamp, the top of my drawer, and on my bed. I was in disbelief at what just happened. As a reaction to what Kyle just did, I put my arms up to my face because I didn't know what he would do next. I then felt his hand grab my left arm, and then he did something that made me change how I saw him as a person. I saw glass from my phone in his hand, and before I could even say anything or move, Kyle plunged the glass into my arm so fast and then took it out. 2 seconds later, I then screamed. I screamed so loud that probably Africa could even hear me as I was still screaming. Kyle then screamed at me, "Are you happy now?" And then he ran out of my room and out of my apartment. I really wish my mother was home, but of course she wasn't. I then ran right to my bathroom and washed the stab wound with soap and water. It was hurting like hell. When I did that, I then got a humongous bandage and put it on my left arm. After doing that, I went back to my phone, took the shattered screen protector off, and then proceeded to block Kyle on everything. If he tries to come and see me again, I will make it clear that I never want to see him again. To my shock, he never came to my house again, and I never saw him on the streets again. But I did look around my surroundings to be safe, and I indeed was. I kept what Kyle did to me a secret, and when everyone asked me what happened between me and Kyle, I just said our relationship was just not going in the right direction. Everyone actually seemed to believe me. I didn't let anybody know what the real reason was, because I was just too scared. But my being scared all changed because of something that happened in the summer of 2023. It was early August of 2023. I was at work that day, and while working I felt my phone vibrating in my pocket. I took my phone out of my pocket to see who was calling me, and it was a 2112 number for the people who don't know. 2112 is an area code that is a home code in New York City. It wasn't my home phone because I knew my home phone number. I was curious to see what company was calling me, so I picked up the phone and said, "Hello." I heard a woman on the line asking if this was me. I replied back saying, "Yeah, that's me. Who's this?" I then heard the woman say, "This is the 42nd Street, New York Presbyterian Hospital, Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center calling, and I'm here to inform you that your mother along with 10 people have been hit by a car and she is in critical condition." As I heard this, I felt my hand shaking. While holding the phone, I tried staying in composure, and I said, "I'll be there right away." I ran out of my workplace so fast, without telling anyone where I was going or what happened. I got to the hospital. In about 10 to 15 minutes, I asked where my mom was, and a woman at the front desk said that she was in a room right down the hall. I ran over to that room, and when I got to that room, I saw that she was in a coma. I sat down next to her crying like I've never cried before in my life. A nurse came in, and I asked her for the details of that incident. The nurse said that a man stole a car while intoxicated, and he drove onto a wrong-way street and then onto a sidewalk, striking a cyclist at first, then hit a woman who is your mom, and about 5 others, and they all flew into each other. I was so taken back hearing this that I asked if they had found out the guy's name yet. The nurse said, "We don't know yet, but we'll probably get an answer tomorrow." The next day came, and there was amazing news and life-shattering news. I'll start off with the good news. The good news was that my mom woke up. The bad news is that the person who drove the vehicle that hit my mother and 6 other people was someone I knew very well. It was Kyle. I was in such incredulity. I was going to make sure that he was not going to get away with this. Thank God he got tackled by good Samaritans on the street, and that the police have him in custody. I wanted to scream so badly, but I would just be humiliating myself by doing that. Another part of the bad news is that a couple of days later, I would find out that my mother would never be able to walk again. I felt as if my life was over when this news story broke. Out all around the country, everyone thought this was a terrorist attack. They thought that because of the 7 bodies all flying into each other, I also felt very self-assured that I would tell my experiences of dating Kyle to the court and to the public, but keeping who I am private. I wrote a letter to the court where Kyle was at, and I wrote about the time he assaulted me with the shattered glass of my phone that he threw after this was read out in court. Another woman who Kyle dated in 2022 came forward about how she was a victim of domestic violence by Kyle. This warmed my heart because she felt inspired to tell her story as well, and that we will stick together in the end. Kyle was found guilty of his domestic violence against me and the other woman he dated, and for his drunk driving case, after he was found guilty, he was sentenced to 2.5 years behind bars. That sentence is way too short. It should be 20 years because of the 7 victims he unintentionally hit with a car and leaving most of them with lifetime injuries. He must have hired an amazing lawyer because of such a short sentencing. I have nothing but hatred for Kyle. Now, after he changed my mother's life, for the worse, people like him never change. I know I might be taking things out of proportion, but I'm never going to get over this, and this is how I really feel while Kyle is serving his time in prison. I hope that he reflects on the actions he took to hurt people and goes to rehab where he changes as a person. My advice to him is that he needs to move out of New York City, which is a very toxic environment, and start a new life where he helps people instead of hurting people. This happened a couple of days ago on a warm June evening. I live in a small town, the kind of place where most streets go quiet after sunset. There is a 24-hour self-service car wash on the edge of town, 4 concrete bays, old soap machines, and a single rusty Coke machine that never has any drinks. Inside, dim yellow bulbs hang over each bay, and they buzz so softly you can hear them even before you turn off your engine. I usually wash my truck during daylight because the place feels safer, but that afternoon, every bay was taken. I decided to wait until the evening rush had passed around 9:30. I pulled in. The asphalt was still warm from the day, and a few bugs circled the lights, only one. Other car sat in the lot, a dusty sedan parked at the far edge near the vacuums. When I stepped out, I noticed a man standing about 20 yards away beside one of the vacuum hosts. He wore baggy jeans and a stained t-shirt. At first, I figured he was on his way to the all-night gas station across the street. People cut through the car wash lot all the time, so I paid him no mind. I dug a handful of quarters from my pocket, slid them into the slot, and squeezed. The trigger on the pressure wand water blasted out, hissing so loud, drowned every other sound as I moved around the truck. I heard a strange metallic thump. I let off the trigger for a second and saw the same man smashing his forehead against the metal housing of the vacuum again and again, like he felt nothing at all. A tiny dark patch was forming on the machine where his skin met steel, I thought. Great, another guy spaced out on something. I kept my guard up, but kept washing my town has its share of addicts. If you leave them alone, they usually wander off a few minutes later. A faded red Chevy pickup from the 90s rattled into the lot. The body was dented, and the muffler hung low. The truck rolled right up to the man, and he climbed into the passenger side without a word. The driver, a shape I could barely see through the dirty windshield, spun the wheels and headed back out to the road. I felt a wave of relief. Problem gone. I thought I finished rinsing the soap, tossed the nozzle back, and climbed into my truck. I pulled out of the car wash, turned left toward home, and saw the red Chevy at the pumps of the 24-hour station. It was hard to miss with its mismatched door and crooked tailgate. I passed by and forgot about it 3 blocks later. I checked my mirror headlights. Nothing odd about headlights at night, but when I made a right turn onto Willow Street, the lights turned on. My pulse kicked up a notch. At the next corner, I turned left without signaling. The headlights stuck to me like glue. That was enough. I pressed the gas and started weaving through the grid of neighborhood streets, taking random turns, rolling through a stop sign, anything to shake the truck. My tires squealed once, and I told myself to calm down before I wrecked after 3 quick turns. I darted up a long gravel driveway that led to an empty barn for sale. I killed my lights and waited. Seconds crawled by. The red Chevy roared past the driveway without slowing, only when its tail lights were tiny embers did. I back out and eased the opposite way toward my house. My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my temples, but I told myself the night was over. I was safe at home. The porch light greeted me. I parked, locked the truck, and walked toward the front door out of habit. I glanced toward our small backyard and saw the shed light glowing. The wooden door stood wide open. My first thought was that my little brother had borrowed tools to work on his truck. He forgets to switch the light off all the time. I walked over to close it. The yard backs up to a thin strip of woods. Oaks and pines grow so thick you can't see more than a few yards in. I pulled the string to kill the shed light and swung the door shut. Right then, something crunched in the leaves beyond the tree line, slow, deliberate. Footsteps on dry ground. Every hair on my arms lifted. I backed away, locked the shed, and hurried inside, double-checking every window and door latch. I had just reached the stairs when pounding rattled the back door. 3 hard slams. Then silence. A thin curtain covers the door's window, and the porch bulb was burned out, so I couldn't see who or what stood there before. I could move. The pounding started again, harder, rattling the glass. I yelled, "I'm calling the police." The pounding stopped, and through the quiet, I heard the same eerie laugh I had heard in the car wash bay hours earlier. Raspy, playful wrong. The laugh faded, and nothing else happened. I waited. 5 tense minutes, phone in hand, and climbed upstairs, maybe. That was it. I told myself maybe he finally left sleep. Did not come easily, but sometime after midnight. I drifted off at 3 o'clock, and thirst dragged me awake. I tiptoed downstairs, still half asleep, and felt a cool draft. The back door hung open an inch. My stomach dropped. My first stupid impulse was to slam it shut, but then I heard a soft rustle from the living room. I peered. Around the doorway, in the faint glow of a street lamp through the curtains, I saw the outline of someone crouching behind the couch, wide shoulders rising and falling with each breath. I backed away, walked as silently as I could up the stairs, and locked myself in my bedroom. Hands shaking, I dialed 911 while I whispered to the operator. A floorboard creaked on the staircase outside. The laugh came. Again, closer, followed by slow, uneven steps. The man reached my door and pounded with both fists, screaming slurred threats and dirty words I had never even heard before. The thin wood shook in its frame. The dispatcher stayed calm and said officers were already on my street. I told her the intruder was inside upstairs, right outside my door. She said she would tell them to enter through the back because the door was open. The pounding stopped, and for a second there was silence. Then I heard heavy boots thudding down the stairs. The front door must have flashed with police lights because everything went quiet. Officers shouted commands, and I heard a clatter of metal on tile. Something skidded across the kitchen floor. Minutes later, an officer knocked on my bedroom door and told me it was safe. I stepped out and saw 2 more officers cuffing the man from the car wash. A large kitchen knife lay on the linoleum near his feet. He stared at me with glassy eyes, mumbling nonsense, a trickle of dried blood still on his forehead. From earlier, they charged him with breaking and entering possession of a weapon and several drug offenses. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I had walked into the living room instead of heading back upstairs. I replay every tiny decision, the random driveway, locking the doors, calling the police, and how each one saved me. I don't ever want to know what he planned to do, so please learn from my scare. Always look around, trust your instincts, and lock every single door before you go to sleep. My name is Damon. I should begin by giving a summary of how I came to know about the events in this story. A girlfriend of mine, whom I was dating for several years back in the early 2000s, told me about this bizarre occurrence to better understand why I wholeheartedly believe the details of the story as she remembered it, and to emphasize that there is virtually no possibility of a logical explanation. For what occurred, I need to explain a bit about my ex-girlfriend. She was 20 years old, and I was 22 at that time. My girlfriend's name was Jenna. She was extremely sweet and a little naive. Endearingly, so some facts about Jenna's character are that she has never experienced or been diagnosed with any mental illness or suffered from any hallucinations either before or after the events of this story took place. On the rare occasions that she attempted to lie or exaggerate a story, it was always obvious as she was a very bad liar. I knew Jenna well enough at that time that I was able to determine if she was even slightly embellishing something for dramatic effect. She really did not have a duplicitous bone in her body, as I can best recall it as it was told to me, and with a conscious effort not to exaggerate the details. On the day this took place, Jenna was driving to her aunt and cousin's apartment in town, I think to visit this cousin who was approximately the same age as Jenna. The two were very close, having grown up together in this apartment. Her aunt and her cousin, whose name was Stacy, lived alone, as Stacy's father had been out of the picture, apparently for quite a long time, a common scenario Jenna's closeness with. Her family afforded her pretty much unrestricted access to all her immediate family's homes and apartments. She also had spare keys for most of them. She was welcome to come and go for the most part as she pleased. This included unannounced visits. I honestly cannot remember specifically if we had cell phones back then for normal use, however. Jenna going over to her aunt and cousin Stacy's apartment that day likely didn't require a phone call to them announcing her visit, so she came with. No advance notice driving up to their apartment that afternoon. The apartment complex had 2 floors. A dirt patch in the front near the street could be parked on, but the tenant's parking was in the rear of the building with all the front doors. Facing the street, these apartments had one entrance and no access out the back, as I was told and knew myself from driving by the area. Many times in the past, there was one large window in the front of each apartment, though none in the back. Or, on the sides of the apartment, this complex was not the best of places, but her aunt and Stacy both had at least a room of their own. Jenna had driven over and parked in front of the place with the tenant parking in the back. She had no reason to believe that either one or both of her family members weren't at home, though she would not be able to see their vehicles from the front street side. Where she had parked, Jenna did, as she normally did. She headed upstairs 1 flight, walking 3 apartments down the open breezeway to her aunt and cousin's door. She tried the doorknob and finding it locked used her key to open the door without knocking. This was not uncommon or unusual for her, even though the apartment complex was not in the most glamorous part of town, hence the locked door. Jenna still knew she was more than welcome to enter unannounced. So after unlocking the front door, she stepped inside, not immediately seeing either her aunt or Stacy. Upon entering, she walked from the front door to her left and looked inside the small kitchen. Finding no one there, she called out to her aunt and Stacy, "Hey guys, it's just me." Getting no reply, Jenna then began walking down the short hallway that led to the 2 bedrooms in the back of the small apartment. The first room to her right was her aunt's room, which she glanced inside, but seeing no one, she called out again, "Hey Stas, it's Jun." After this too elicited no response, Jenna headed further down the hallway at this time. Jenna recalled that she was fairly convinced that no one was home, since it would be nearly impossible not to have heard her when she announced herself more. Then once inside the small space from her vantage point in the hallway, she said the one bathroom at the end was vacant and the lights in the apartment were for the most part turned off, with the exception of her cousin's room. Its singular light faintly illuminated the short hallway. Jenna then walked a few steps to her cousin's doorway to look inside to her left. She said were her cousin's dresser drawers, and directly in front of her was her cousin Stacy's bed. There, Jenna saw that Stacy was sitting upright but motionless on the edge of her small mattress, facing away from Jenna in the room's doorway. Jenna was momentarily surprised. She assumed that had nothing been wrong, her cousin would have replied to her when she first entered the apartment. Jenna asked her cousin if she was okay while still standing at the doorway, but her cousin, sitting on the mattress edge, made no movement in response that would indicate she was even aware of Jenna's presence. Now becoming increasingly concerned about her cousin, Jenna began moving further into the room toward the bed. She was confused by Stacy's strange behavior and imagined all the worst case scenarios spinning in her mind that could explain Stacy's rigid, unmoving posture. Just as she was nearing the end of Stacy's bed, her aunt's voice came from the living room area, as well as the familiar sounds of the front door opening. And what she said sounded like someone with arms full of grocery bags being shuffled into the kitchen area. Her aunt, she recognized, was in a casual conversation with someone else in the small kitchen in the same kind of cheerful banter, replying to her aunt, and her aunt's rambling was the unmistakable voice of Stacy, her cousin, her aunt's only daughter, and roommate, whose bed she was now facing away from. As she listened to the commotion in the kitchen, Jenna was now in a semi-state of shock and confusion. As she described it with the labor her brain was under as it tried to rationalize and make sense of all the contradicting sensory input, all in less than a second of actual time. Oh, she said it was like a movie scene set to slow motion. Finding her voice, she softly called down the hallway and began to tell her aunt that she just stopped. I bet no one was home, and then paused mid-sentence. She described her heart thumping and a cold dread washing over her as she slowly turned back toward Stacy's room. To her horror, the figure on the bed had turned its head in her words in an unnatural way without moving her shoulders or lower body at all. What should have been there, the familiar face of her cousin, was gone. It was replaced by a grotesque face that stared back at her. Its skin was like slate-gray sharp angles where there should have been curves, with a gaze that was completely emotionless. It had a mouth, but without any lips. Its black eyes were deep-set in dark pits and devoid of life. Not angry, but slightly squinting, reflecting her image in them like some dark mirror. As she stood there in front of this thing that was defying her reality, she screamed and bolted down the hallway, bursting into the kitchen where her aunt and Stacy were unpacking groceries. In a frantic jumble of words, she tried to tell them, and finally just grabbed her cousin's arm and said, "No, there's another Stacy. She's not right. She's in your room." The three of them cautiously returned to Stacy's room. Jenna was shaking visibly. She sat at this point and hesitated to look inside. But the room was now empty, the demon-like entity that defied logical description so horrifying that her mind felt unhinged as it struggled to process. It was now gone, but she knew what she had seen. It wasn't a hallucination, not a trick of the light. It was something else entirely, something evil that had worn her. Cousin's face like a mask. The only sign of recent occupancy was the faint indentation on the mattress. Where the thing had been sitting, Jenna's aunt and cousin searched the apartment in hushed silence and with a baseball bat, but there was no trace of her cousin's doppelganger. No back windows to escape through, no hidden doors or exits, no access panels, service hatches, or attic space, and no possible explanation for its sudden disappearance. She never went to her aunt's and cousin's apartment after this, and I can't recall her telling me if they even stayed much longer there. I believe the events of that day left a scar on Jenna's soul, a terrifying reminder that the world held mysteries far darker than she had ever imagined. I worked for an outdoor outfitter, so my kids and I already own good camping gear. My wife, though, had never joined us on a trip. I wanted her to feel comfortable, so I bought a huge family tent, the kind you can almost stand up in. We planned to meet several friends and their children at a lake only an hour from home by mid-afternoon. The new tent was standing proud on a flat patch of grass. I stuffed the sleeping bags, backpacks, and cooking box inside, zipped it shut, and took my family for a slow walk around. The shoreline, the sky looked calm. Weather radio said nothing about storms, but that lake sat in a valley famous for sudden microblasts halfway around the water. The wind flipped like a switch. Trees on the ridge bent, low sand skittered off the beach, and the surface of the lake turned white with chop. I saw something tumble across the water, a bright flash of nylon, and realized it was our brand new tent gear, and all sailing like a giant kite. I yelled, kicked off my shoes, and dove in without thinking. Cold waves slapped my face. I swam hard, grabbed a tie-down cord, and dragged the whole mess back to shore before it sank. The damage was ugly. The rainfly was shredded, 2 poles snapped, and everything inside was soaked. A few small items. My daughter's flashlight, a camp pillow, never showed up again. We tried not to cry over lost gear. Instead, we built 2 big fires to dry clothes and planned to sleep in my wife's 35-year-old station wagon. It barely ran, but it had a roof. Friends rolled in just before dusk. They loaned spare blankets and squeezed our kids into their tents. Spirits lifted. We grilled hot dogs, laughed about my swim, and swore the worst was over around midnight. My wife and I climbed into the wagon we flattened. The back seat slid an air mattress on top and settled under damp quilts. Wind rattled every loose part of that old car, but we felt mostly safe until the first heavy drops hit the roof. The sprinkle tornado, a roar rain sheeted sideways through broken window seals, soaking our heads and pillows. Lightning flashed so close it left bright shapes behind my eyelids. I grabbed the walkie-talkie "You kids okay?" I asked. "Yeah, this is awesome." My son shouted back brave because his friends could. Hear him seconds later. A bolt cracked a pine between the tents. The trunk exploded, hurling bark. Like shrapnel ground shock made. The station wagon hopped. All the kids screamed at once, and the radio fizzed with panic. They bolted for the cars, slipping. In mud faces lit by lightning strobe, my wife clenched my arm. "This is camping," she said through chattering teeth. Never again we stuffed our kids inside, 8 of us, now huddled in that wagon rain, pouring through window seams. Then the wind did something new. It quieted, but only for a heartbeat. In that hush, every person in the car heard it, a long, low wail, drifting out of the forest across the flooded campsites. It was not the wind itself. It was a voice, or something shaped like a voice, rising and falling in a pattern that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Nobody spoke outside. Lightning flashed, and in that blinding white light, I saw a tall, thin figure standing just inside the tree line. No coat, no hat, only a black outline, as if the storm had cut a human silhouette out of night and nailed it to the trunks. The flash ended, and the world went dark again. My youngest asked, "Dad, who's out there?" "I don't know," I said, and wished I had lied. The rain returned harder than before. Hail ricocheted off the roof, somewhere beyond the cars. Metal clanged, maybe a loose tent pole, maybe something else. Twice more the lightning flashed, and twice more I saw that shape, in exactly the same place, as if it never moved, but also never left between the flashes. The strange wail kept floating over the lake. It wasn't an animal cry, I recognized, and it wasn't any language. It was like breath pressed through a broken whistle. We waited like that for 40 minutes, water dripping down our necks, breath fogging the windows. My wife held each child's hand, even though her own hands shook. Finally, the storm limped away, thunder faded into distant hills, and the wail with it. I looked again. No shadow stood at the trees. Now only torn tents and broken branches littered the muddy ground. The station wagon refused to start, so we stayed cold until dawn. At first light, everyone crawled out, mud-coated our shoes like concrete. We found the big pine split by lightning, jagged trunk burned core, but no footprints, no signs of a night visitor. One friend joked, it was just the storm, playing tricks. Nobody laughed. We cooked oatmeal on a propane stove. Steam rose from wet clothes, hung between cars like sad flags. The kids finally thawed and chatted about the tree that almost crushed them. My wife stayed quiet until we packed the last cooler home. She said no. Back in the driveway, she announced that she was finished with camping forever. Yet 2 months later, she agreed to try again, certain nothing could top that night. Nothing ever did over the next 28 years. We camped through drizzle, heat waves, even one mild hurricane fringe, but we never again heard a wail under lightning, nor saw a motionless shadow watching from the trees. I patched that first tent by hand needle thread, extra nylon squares, and we still own it. The lake storm left stains the color of rust along one side, sometimes late at night when moonlight falls just right on the fabric. Those stains almost look like a tall, thin figure. My wife swears it is only dirt, but she still refuses to camp near that lake, and I will never blame her. It was a chilly night in early November back in 2018 when I worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour convenience store just outside Asheville, North Carolina. The store sat isolated at the edge of town, the road mostly empty after midnight, except for an occasional trucker or traveler passing through. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, and the hum of the coolers was my constant companion as I stocked shelves or idly swept the floor to pass the time. The night started normally enough around 1 o'clock a.m. A couple of teenagers stopped in, grabbing snacks and energy drinks, laughing and talking loudly. After they left, silence settled again. The minutes felt endless as I watched the clock, waiting for sunrise to relieve the uneasy quiet. Around 2:30 a.m., headlights pulled into the lot a beat-up pickup truck, rusted and noisy, rolled slowly into a parking space. Farthest from the front doors, the driver, a man I'd never seen before, sat in the truck for several minutes, engines still rumbling, headlights piercing the darkness through the store window. I couldn't see clearly into the cab, just the silhouette of someone hunched forward, motionless. I continued wiping down the counter, glancing up periodically. My chest tightened slightly with discomfort, though at first I dismissed it as paranoia from too many quiet nights. Alone, finally, the truck door creaked open, and a man stepped out. He moved with an unsettling slowness, each step deliberate and heavy. He was tall and thin, wearing a worn brown jacket, a baseball cap pulled low, casting his face into shadow as he entered the store. I forced myself to offer a polite greeting, trying not to let my unease show. He said nothing, barely acknowledging me as he began pacing the aisles. He wasn't shopping, just walking slowly, occasionally pausing to stare at the products. Something about his manner, the quiet intensity in his slow movements, stirred a deeper worry within me. I pretended to rearrange items behind the counter, glancing periodically at the store mirrors, angled to show the aisles. He finally selected a single can of soda and approached the counter up close. I noticed his gaunt features, pale skin, and the peculiar emptiness in his eyes. His stare met mine briefly as he handed me a crumpled dollar bill, but he quickly looked away, as if intentionally avoiding eye contact. I rang up his purchase, handed him the change, and he left without a word. Relief washed over me momentarily, yet I found myself watching him walk back to his truck instead of getting inside. He leaned against the vehicle, sipping slowly from the soda can and staring directly into the store. Minutes ticked by, and my nerves began to fray. Every instinct urged me to lock the doors, but store policy forbade locking up while open for business. Eventually, he climbed back into his truck, started the engine, and pulled away, slowly vanishing down the dark road. I exhaled deeply, convinced I had overreacted, perhaps spooked by nothing more than late-night anxiety. The store returned to silence, and I busied myself restocking the coffee station. But barely 20 minutes later, I saw familiar headlights approach. Again, my stomach tightened as I recognized the same battered truck pulling into the parking lot. This time parking closer, he sat motionless. Again, headlights blaring into the store, engine idling loudly. In the otherwise silent night, fear began to take hold. I moved behind the counter, picking up the store phone, feeling slightly comforted by its solid weight in my hand. The man got out again, but this time he moved faster, more purposefully, heading straight toward the entrance. My pulse quickened, each heartbeat pounding heavily in my chest. He entered abruptly, eyes fixed directly on me. Unblinking, I braced myself, gripping the phone tightly, ready to dial. He approached the counter, standing silently for several seconds that felt like eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, scratchy and strained. "Were you here yesterday?" I hesitated, unsure how to respond. I had worked the previous night, but nothing unusual had happened. "Yes," I replied cautiously. He stared at me intently, as if searching for something in my expression, his lips trembling slightly. "Did someone come in here asking about me?" His voice had an urgent, almost desperate edge. My mind raced, recalling nothing from the night before that matched his description. "No," I said softly, shaking my head. "No one asked about you." He stared silently for another moment, eyes flickering with suspicion. Then abruptly he turned and walked quickly back to his truck. Without another word, the vehicle roared to life and sped off, tires screeching briefly on the pavement. I stood, frozen, heart hammering, wildly unsure of what had just occurred. The rest of the night passed slowly, every noise outside making me jump, eyes continuously darting toward the road. When the morning shift arrived, I recounted the encounter, though it sounded vague and irrational. In daylight days later, while skimming the local news online, I saw his face again. The headline said, "A cold, heavy dread through me, man wanted for questioning a missing persons case." The article detailed the disappearance of a local woman 2 nights before my encounter last, seen at a gas station just outside town driving alone late at night. Investigators described the man they sought as tall, thin, wearing a brown jacket, and driving a battered pickup as my eyes traced the grainy photo of his face, that vacant stare now hauntingly familiar. A chilling thought overwhelmed me, the desperation in his voice, the urgency in his question. Had he thought someone here had witnessed something? Had I unknowingly been inches from a suspected criminal, searching desperately for anyone who could place him at the scene? I never saw him again, but I quit shortly after, unable to shake the lingering dread. Each night brought, even now years later, driving past that convenience store still makes my heart race and brings back the unsettling, unanswered questions from that cold, quiet night.